is doubtful. Even the above statement of it, taken from an article by Fraser in 1887, cannot escape the criticism that it expresses an arbitrary preference of the author, and would be challenged today by Fraser himself, who has repeatedly changed his view on the subject. It is quite obvious that the nature of totemism and exogamy could be most easily grasped if we could get into closer touch with the origin of both institutions. But in judging the state of affairs we must not forget the remark of Andrew Lang that even primitive races have not preserved these original forms and the conditions of their origin, so that we are altogether dependent upon hypotheses to take the place of the observation we lack. Among the attempted explanations some seem inadequate from the very beginning in the judgment of the psychologist. They are altogether too rational and do not take into consideration the effective character of what they are to explain. Others rest on assumptions which observation fails to verify, while still others appeal to facts which could better be subjected to another interpretation. The refutation of these various opinions as a rule hardly presents any difficulties. The authors are, as usual, stronger in criticism which they practice on each other than in their own work. The final result, as regards most of the points treated, is a non liquet. It is therefore not surprising that most of the new literature on the subject, which we have largely omitted here, shows the unmistakable effort to reject a general solution of totemic problems as unfeasible. See, for instance, B. Goldenweiser in the Journal of American Folklore 23, 1910, reviewed in the Britannica Yearbook, 1913. I have taken the liberty of disregarding the chronological order in stating these contradictory hypotheses. A. The origin of totemism. The question of the origin of totemism can also be formulated as follows: How did primitive people come to select the names of animals, plants, and inanimate objects for themselves and their tribes? The Scotchman MacLennan, who discovered totemism and exogamy for science, refrained from publishing his views of the origin of totemism. According to a communication of Andrew Lang, he was for a time inclined to trace totemism back to the custom of tattooing. I shall divide the accepted theories of the derivation of totemism into three groups: alpha, nominalistic; beta, sociological; and gamma, psychological. Alpha, the nominalistic theories. The information about these theories will justify their summation under the headings I have used. Garcilaso de la Vega, a descendant of the Peruvian Incas, who wrote the history of his race in the 17th century, is already said to have traced back what was known to him about totemic phenomena to the need of the tribes to differentiate themselves from each other by means of names. The same idea appears centuries later in the Ethnology of A.K. Keene, where totems are said to be derived from heraldic badges, through which individuals, families, and tribes wanted to differentiate themselves. Max Müller expresses the same opinion about the meaning of the totem in his Contributions to the Science of Mythology. A totem is said to be 1. A mark of the clan; 2. A clan name; 3. The name of the ancestor of the clan; 4. The name of the object which the clan reveres. J. Pickler wrote later, in 1899, that men needed a permanent name for communities and individuals that could be preserved in writing. Thus totemism arises not from a religious but from a prosaic everyday need of mankind. The giving of names, which is the essence of totemism, is a result of the technique of primitive writing. The totem is of the nature of an easily represented writing symbol. But if savages first bore the name of an animal, they deduced the idea of relationship from this animal. Herbert Spencer also thought that the origin of totemism was to be found in the giving of names. The attributes of certain individuals, he showed, had brought about their being named after animals, so that they had come to have names of honor or nicknames, which continued in their descendants. As a result of the indefiniteness and incomprehensibility of primitive languages, these names are said to have been taken by later generations as proof of their descent from the animals themselves. Totemism would thus be the result of a mistaken reverence for ancestors. Lord Avebury, better known under his former name, Sir John Lubbock, has expressed himself quite similarly about the origin of totemism, though without emphasizing the misunderstanding. If we want to explain the veneration of animals, we must not forget how often human names are borrowed from animals. The children and followers of a man who was called Bear or Lion naturally made this their ancestral name. In this way it came about that the animal itself came to be respected and finally venerated. Fison has advanced what seems an irrefutable objection to such a derivation of the totem name from the names of individuals. He shows from conditions in Australia that the totem is always the mark of a group of people and never of an individual. But if it were otherwise, if the totem was originally the name of a single individual, it could never, with the system of maternal inheritance, descend to his children. The theories thus far stated are evidently inadequate. They may explain how animal names came to be applied to primitive tribes, but they can never explain the importance attached to the giving of names which constitutes the totemic system. The most noteworthy theory of this group has been developed by Andrew Lang in his books Social Origins, 1903, and The Secret of the Totem, 1905. This theory still makes naming the center of the problem, but it uses two interesting psychological factors and thus may claim to have contributed to the final solution of the riddle of totemism. Andrew Lang holds that it does not make any difference how clans acquire their animal names. It might be assumed that one day they awoke to the consciousness that they had them without being able to account from where they came. The origin of these names had been forgotten. In that case, they would seek to acquire more information by pondering over their names. And with their conviction of the importance of names, they necessarily came to all the ideas that are contained in the totemic system. For primitive men, as for savages of today and even for our children, a name is not indifferent and conventional as it seems to us, but is something important and essential. A man's name is one of the main constituents of his person and perhaps a part of his psyche. The fact that they had the same names as animals must have led primitive men to assume a secret and important bond between their persons and the particular animal species. What other bond than consanguinity could it be? But if the similarity of names once led to this assumption, it could also account directly for the totemic prohibitions of the blood taboo, including exogamy. "No more than these three things, a group animal name of unknown origin, belief in a transcendental connection between all bearers, human and bestial, of the same name, and belief in the blood superstitions, were needed to give rise to all the totemic creeds and practices, including exogamy." Secret of the Totem, page 126. Lang's explanation extends over two periods. It derives the totemic system of psychological necessity from the totem names, on the assumption that the origin of the naming has been forgotten. The other part of the theory now seeks to clear up the origin of these names. We shall see that it bears an entirely different stamp. This other part of the Lang theory is not markedly different from those which I have called nominalistic. The practical need of differentiation compelled the individual tribes to assume names, and therefore they tolerated the names which every tribe ascribed to the other. This naming from without is the peculiarity of Lang's construction. The fact that the names which thus originated were borrowed from animals is not further remarkable and need not have been felt by primitive men as abuse or derision. Besides, Lang has cited numerous cases from later epochs of history in which names given from without that were first meant to be derisive were accepted by those nicknamed and voluntarily borne, the Guises, Whigs, and Tories. The assumption that the origin of these names was forgotten in the course of time connects the second part of the Lang theory with the first one just mentioned. Beta. The sociological theories. S.